Joining me now are Mimi Rocah, Westchester County DA, and former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. I'm going to take a brief pause to drink some water. Also with us, Mark Joseph Stern, a senior writer covering the courts at Slate. Mark, I'm going to go to you right now so that I can continue to cough and ask you what your assessment is about how long the D.C. Circuit Court may take to adjudicate this issue.
You know, it really all depends on what panel of judges takes this case, and it's randomly assigned. There are 4 Republican-appointed judges on the D.C. Circuit who have shown some inclination toward running interference for Trump to varying degrees. And if 2 of those judges land on this panel, that panel can really draw out the process. You know, they can take quite a long time to hear the case, issue a decision. In past appeals to the D.C. Circuit, these cases have usually just by chance gone to liberal panels, which have worked really quickly to expedite the process and get an answer out fast because they don't want to delay justice. But if this does land in the hands of conservative judges on that court, we could be waiting for months and months until we get a decision, and all that time Judge Chutkan's proceedings would almost certainly be stayed.
Mimi, it feels like there are very few good options here. What is the best case scenario as you see this appeals process take flight, as it were?
I think the best case scenario is, as Mark alluded to, that the Court of Appeals rules quickly. And this may sound a little bit naive, but I'm gonna say it. I mean, this is a motion that any lawyer would file. I have said many times, we've talked many times about Trump using appeals as a delay tactic. This is a real issue that they have it makes sense that they're appealing it. It's not frivolous.
Yeah.
I don't think ultimately on the merits he will win. And I think it's important that the Court of Appeals that he is appealing to has already ruled on this in the civil context and said he does not have immunity. Now, civil and criminal are very different. I think there's a decent argument. One way of thinking about it, though, is that actually in the criminal context, a court would be less likely to give immunity than in a civil one, because in a civil case, anyone can file a civil case, right? And they don't want that floodgates. Criminal cases, as we have seen in history against a sitting president or former sitting president, are very rare. So I think there is a good chance that the Court of Appeals can rule quickly and get this moving. What happens at the Supreme Court is a bigger unknown. But again, they have deferred on other cases related to Trump and just, summarily affirmed the Court of Appeals and not wanted to weigh into this. This is a more important legal question, so we will have to see.
Mark, when we talk about the Supreme Court, it is a big question mark, which I think surprises some people that have seen other positions this court has taken on important conservative matters. What is your expectation here about who might be who are the allies that Trump might have on the high court? Is it Justice Thomas? Is it Justice Kavanaugh? Is it more than the 2 of them? I mean, who do you think would be most sympathetic to his argument here?
So, look, we've seen time and again that Justice Thomas almost always votes with Donald Trump when he takes some case to the Supreme Court seeking to thwart a subpoena or an indictment or any kind of lawsuit. Justice Thomas is there walking arm in arm with him. And to a lesser degree, so is Justice Alito. And both of them have expressed views that they really do think that this president and former president now is under this kind of unfair assault that treats him almost illegitimately, and that they feel some kind of independent obligation as the third branch to stand up to that. Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are more interesting. They have indicated some concern for protecting the president from invasive lawsuits. The criminal question remains very much open, and as Mimi alluded to, it's a very different case. It's not one that the Supreme Court ever dealt with squarely when Trump was president, when it really did try to dodge the these issues. So one thing that I think is important to understand about this appeal is that it goes to Judge Chutkan's jurisdiction to hear this case, right? It goes to the question of whether she even has the power to carry on here, or whether Trump is completely immune, and so the entire case has to be thrown out. I think the gravity of that question, it's so different from, can this evidence be introduced? Can this witness testify? This is the whole deal right here. And I think the gravity of that will give some of the justices pause and make them want to take on this case and really hear full arguments, full briefing, and issue a decision on the merits. That could take until June, at which point it might really be too late for a trial. So, even if Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch ultimately come out against Trump on this question, they might think it's serious enough that they want to take it under consideration, and that alone could be enough to run out the clock.
Right. By dint of the fact that they're taking it up, it is an inherently pro-Trump move, or at least in terms of his defense strategy. Mimi, the Supreme Court, we all remember Bush v. Gore, took like a day for them to issue their opinion on that. Is there any chance, Mark just said June, if the Supreme Court decides to take this up, and I'm assuming that's the expedited calendar.
Well, because that's when they normally do come down with their decisions. But look, this is a different scenario. This is an interlocutory appeal. There is an indictment pending. There is a trial calendar set. There are jurors. Even a partisan Supreme Court, even a partisan justice, if they have any shred of institutional respect for the court system, has to recognize that this isn't something they can wait 6 months on, I don't think. It should be an expedited appeal. Because it's not like Bush v. Gore where it's about the election. It's about a pending criminal indictment where jurors have already been called. And I do think,
Well, it is about the 2024 election, too, in some ways, right?
Yes,
there is the thinking that the American public should have some conclusion to all
absolutely.
of this. Yeah.
There's those arguments as well. But also, I do think there's a decent argument that we're going to have to see the briefing and how Judge Chutkan rules, whether she can even proceed now with the case.
And I want to talk about that because there's sort of parallel hurdles here. There's the ultimate question of whether or not he has the immunity. But, Mark, there's the question of whether Trump can grind everything to a halt. I think it was very interesting that Judge Chutkan moved forward with the jury selection process. I think those letters went out at the end of last week or this week, almost a signal of like, hey, look, the work is starting. We need to get this underway. This is all, the machinery of justice is cranking along. What do you think the likelihood is that a stay he is granted here and all of the preparations for this March 4th trial grind to a halt?
I think it's quite unlikely that Judge Chutkan would grant such a sweeping stay. A more limited stay is within the realm of possibility, but Trump's lawyers are arguing here that there is a mandatory freeze on all proceedings as soon as they even file the appeal. So Trump's lawyers say, hey, we're going to the D.C. Circuit now. Judge Chutkan, by law, you must stop everything you're doing. And they make that argument based on a 5-4 decision last term written by Justice Kavanaugh that really doesn't say any of that. It was a narrow decision involving arbitration, not a criminal trial. So it's pretty much a Hail Mary argument that they're making here. And Judge Chutkan has not shown a lot of tolerance for that. So I don't think that she'll be playing along here. But of course, as we've discussed for several minutes now, once this gets in the hands of the D.C. Circuit, once it gets in the hands of the Supreme Court, higher courts almost always stay these proceedings once they're considering a question. And so it still depends way more on who's handling this in the courts above than what Judge Chutkan decides to do here.
Right, that's the point, is that Judge Chutkan, it seems sort of comical that she would be deciding on the stay given where she is on the immunity appeal to begin with. He could appeal that. It could go to the D.C. Circuit and then also to the Supreme Court. The Circuit Court has been remarkably generous, if you will, in issuing these stays, even on the gag order. It returned to the status quo, which was Donald Trump was ungagged and continued to make inflammatory, dangerous comments about court officials when he was ungagged. This is less immediately perilous to any person. So could they actually say, yes, you can stop everything while we decide on the appeal?
I will be very interested to see the government's response to the motion because, I think when you have an appeal, there is a certain jurisdictional element here that, okay, the appeal is happening now, you can't go forward. I do agree with Mark, there could be a more limited stay. it doesn't mean that juries, I mean, the jury selection process here is going to take forever. So that's why she started it. Maybe that can continue because that doesn't involve the parties. There are maybe certain ways. I mean, this is also unprecedented that it's hard to know. But I will say the D.C. Circuit has also been pretty remarkably fast. That's not unusual for them, and they have continued that in this. So that, I think, is hopeful.
Well, there are a lot of, I'm not one to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but known unknowns, really applicable in this case. Mimi Rocah, Mark Joseph Stern, thank you both for your expertise and your wisdom in unpacking all of this. I appreciate it.